a game that simulates the spirit and charisma of tabletop role-playing. Popup Dungeon invites us to play and create our own craziness, and I will tell you about it in our video review. There was a time when the video game industry experienced a frenzy of Kickstarter campaigns, which gave us a few memorable gems as well as some monumental snooze fests. At that time, in far-off 2014, the Popup Dungeon project appeared. Since then, I've supported it with my own money because the creators had already brought us Ring Runner, still one of the most addictive space shooters, RPG hybrids, and one I recommend without hesitation to this day. What could Triple.B.Titles add to the purest role-playing game genre? Will the new project be a jewel or completely forgettable? 6 years have passed, a little less for those of us who tried the game in beta, and today, finally, we can tell you about this curious creation. Popup Dungeon is something very special. At first glance, it may not seem like much. It even gives the impression that not much effort was made, particularly because the characters we control are basically boxes. All enemies are static images, and the powers and abilities we use are completely unbalanced. These features don't suggest a quality game until we add the appropriate context. In the case of Popup Dungeon, this context is the force that binds all these elements into something fascinating, because this isn't a typical role-playing game, but one of the best tabletop role-playing experiences I've ever had the pleasure of playing. All Popup Dungeon's aesthetics give it the appearance of a physical tabletop game. The pieces are kept in an elegant box styled like a chest. Our improvements hang from a necklace, and they're even obtained from a sort of vending machine. All the options and menus are represented by cards or buttons in the structures of these machines, and while this may be somewhat awkward, this system of buttons and levers integrated into the game elements is simply so fascinating that some design whimsy can be forgiven. Popup Dungeon has a handful of game modes that are enabled as we overcome challenges. The Wizard's Tower is the main mode where we climb the floors of the building. We also have individual campaigns and a roguelike mode that lacks story and focuses on combat. As a finishing touch, we have the campaigns designed by the players themselves, but we'll speak more about this further on. Popup Dungeon's playability has two main elements. On one hand, we have the narration of background stories, and on the other, map exploration and combat. The story takes place on the tabletop, with a series of nodes that represent places with text, dialogues, dice throws to determine the results of an event, and modifications to our group and its characteristics. Often, our decisions at a node or the luck of the dice will divert the story in specific directions. Map exploration takes place in spaces represented by painted cardboard walls and paper ornaments. We can explore these maps as we want, destroying the furniture if we wish, we get coins if we destroy the right objects, by the way, and finding areas of interest, especially chests with loot, orbs, and seals that improve our abilities and therefore our combat encounters. Popup Dungeon's battles are turn-based and happen on the same map we explore. When combat starts, we're given the opportunity to place our characters in strategic positions, taking into account the order of the turns as shown in the upper right corner. Each character has a number of action points that we'll use to move around the map and execute our own abilities, represented by cards. Some of these abilities are reactive. They'll activate automatically when certain conditions are met. For example, when the character is attacked head-on, or when a nearby partner is damaged. After the fight, we'll examine the loot that we've won. Our characters can equip what's useful and sell the objects that are not for gold. If we win abilities or improvement books, we can also apply them to our characters at this time. Once all the map's battles have been finished, we'll be allowed to leave it and move forward with the story. It might seem like the above descriptions are extremely brief, but there just isn't much more to be said about the game's elements. This isn't because there's a lack of depth to the general playability, but because Popup Dungeon is designed in such a way that a story, character, map, or any other element can't be specified beforehand. And that's the main feature of the game. Popup Dungeon is designed to work as a tabletop role-playing game, and as such, doesn't expect to be taken too seriously at any point in time. The campaigns offered are likable, fun and sometimes quite out there. And this is fine. It simulates the feeling of playing a role-playing session with our friends, allowing us to go off on tangents and let the game take us wherever it pleases. How else could we explain a dwarf warrior from a medieval fantasy ending up on an asteroid in the middle of space mining bricks with a laser? Or a modern military sergeant facing a giant shrimp in a restaurant found in a dungeon? The existence of a solid background logic in the game's mechanics doesn't mean that there should be one in the individual storylines that make the wheels turn. Sometimes it's enough to give us the basic structure, underlying rules, and then let us as players find the best way of using the pieces provided. From this point of view, Popup Dungeon is appreciated differently, in a special way, which justifies its design and manages to bring a smile to our faces with its tabletop aesthetics. Until now, we've talked about a relaxed and laid-back role-playing game, but there's another part that makes Popup Dungeon even more special and turns it into a potential whirlwind of chaos and enjoyment. The game includes a powerful editor that allows the player to design his or her own abilities, items, characters, enemies, and even whole campaigns. I have a soft spot for any game that lets its users make content to add to it. And Popup Dungeon opens the doors to its players' creativity with a series of editing screens. Of course, all content can be shared online. I was already able to experiment this with downloading Solid Snake, Mega Man, and even Steve from Minecraft to use them as playable characters, each one with its own powers and abilities, each one designed by other users. I myself have added some of my own characters to the game, and I've also played with designing personalized campaigns using the node system. I will say this about the whole creation section. It's a collection of extremely powerful tools, but they're also complex and difficult to use, at least at first. At the time of this review, there weren't adequate tutorials dealing with the creation system, beyond some video tutorials made by the developers and uploaded to their YouTube channel, but there isn't much more. It's been trial and error, and while I've greatly enjoyed editing my own characters, powers, and campaigns, I'll also be the first to admit that the considerable flexibility and potential of the creation system is proportional to the difficulty in entering this section of the game. However, we don't have to even touch the editor if we don't want to. The game, in and of itself, is more than enough to satisfy the role-playing thirst of anyone who explores its paper-wrought worlds, and we can always download the content created by other users. Popup Dungeon is, then, a very enjoyable experience. It might be a little difficult to face at the beginning because of its unusual aesthetics and menu system, but when we understand that the game shouldn't be taken too seriously, the pieces start fitting together very easily. I certainly don't consider it for everyone, but anyone who's enjoyed a tabletop role-playing game will find in Popup Dungeon the same level of enjoyment, craziness, and chaos that make these games so special. And for those who have creative skills, the game offers a dedicated space to satisfy those cravings, to design personalized content that, for the better, will be able to share with the rest of the world. I know that it's something I want to do, and Triple.B Games has just given me the perfect tools to do it. I just have to learn to use them, but that's a whole other matter. Popup Dungeon is a role-playing game that aims to emulate the feeling of playing a tabletop game. Its user interface may seem a little strange at the beginning, but you can quickly get used to its controls. The complex content editor is a strong addition to the title and invites all creatives to contribute their own material for the enjoyment of everyone. Personally, I give it an 8 and hope to develop lots of craziness in this enjoyable project. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel and don't forget to turn on notifications. Follow us on social media and visit www.malditosnerds.com to stay up to date with the latest video game news. Thanks for joining us and see you next time!